Greetings, students, and happy chapter number 6. We're going to talk about the macronutrient protein and the amino acids that are so useful to our body. This is going to be one of our shorter chapters because, again, I'm not going to go into all the details of the different chemical structures and makeup of the different amino acids, right? But there's still a few things we need to make sure to keep in mind here. For those of you who really like science and chemistry, you're going to enjoy reading this chapter in the textbook. All right, so sources of protein in the diet. It's rare that we Americans have a problem with not getting enough protein. We typically actually eat too much protein. So as you can see here, most of our protein, 2/3 of it comes from meat, poultry, seafood, eggs, and dairy products, which we have in somewhat of abundance in our country. Therefore, our U.S. diet is made up primarily of protein that is animal-based or protein that comes from animal sources. Whereas most of the world actually relies on protein that comes from plants and vegetables. And again, think of it this way: as a country's economy gets better, as they get more money, what happens is that they can then import or they can then raise cattle and different animals to provide that animal-based diet. But we here in America, we're considered a wealthy country. And so again, we eat a lot of our protein from animals, yet most of the world doesn't. Here on this slide is some really good sources of protein. I'll let you go through and be aware of what sources are better than others. Okay? So how protein sources impact the diet. Both animal and plant protein provide some good irons and minerals. You can see here vitamin B, iron, zinc, calcium. Some of these things are really good things. So the nutrient that we find in animal-based proteins that we don't find in plant-based proteins is saturated fat. Right, so the nutrient saturated fat is found in animal protein, but it's not found in plant protein. And again, we said saturated fat's not necessarily bad for us. We need fat. We just want to limit that saturated fat intake. Plant sources of protein also provide, as you see here, lots of vitamins and minerals and things that are really good for us. One of the things that is really good for us that we don't find in animal protein is fiber. So we talked a little bit before about the importance of fiber. It's really key in healthy aging. But the nutrient fiber is found only in plant proteins. It's not found in animal proteins, okay? So be aware, combination of both of these is really good for your diet. Right, amino acids, what are they? Amino acids are what we call the basic building blocks of protein. And again, here's where we get into a little bit of the chemistry part of our course, right? So each amino acid has this carbon atom, and then that carbon atom is connected to a hydrogen atom and also an amino group and an acid group, and then it has a side chain. So I know that was kind of long. I'll show you what it looks like in a minute. But basically what we're saying here is kind of like the function of the amino acid can change as its structure of what it looks like changes. And we learned before, whenever we see the word essential, as we see here, essential amino acids, that means that our body can't make it. Therefore, we have to get it in our diet. Essential amino acids, right? So here's what I was describing to you a little bit before here. Again, we're not going to be required to kind of understand that for this nutrition course, but be aware of that, right? And amino acids are linked together by these what we call peptide bonds. And those peptide bonds involve nitrogen, right? And this is what makes protein a little different from what we've talked about before with our fats and our carbohydrates, is that protein contains the element nitrogen. Carbohydrates and fat do not contain nitrogen, right? Again, not going to go into great detail about the structure of our proteins, but be aware that that function of the protein can really change depending on what it looks like, the shape of it. So as I said here, connective tissue proteins and collagen are elongated, or they're longer in length, right? More of a line shape, whereas hemoglobin, which is really important to transport oxygen throughout our body, is more of a circle or a spherical shape. So what we learned here is that protein is altered, or what it can do, the functionality of it changes depending on what the shape of it is, what the chemical makeup is. And we can see here how protein is digested and absorbed. Again, the body's pretty efficient. Like we talked about fat, the body's pretty efficient at digesting and absorbing our protein. So most of that takes place in our small intestine, as we've learned before. And again, we have those what we call helpers, right? We have some of those enzymes and some of those acids and things that will help to break down that protein for our digestion and absorption. So what's a food allergy? So a food allergy happens when a protein that we've consumed from our diet is not, it's absorbed without being fully digested. So let's go back. Remember, we start to consume food at the mouth. It travels into down our GI tract, right, for a long ways. Most of that digestion and absorption is happening in the small intestines. What happens here with food allergies is that when the food goes into that small intestine, it's not able to fully break it down or digest the food. It absorbs it before the digestion completely happens. So that's not good, right? Because we always want to have digestion first, absorption second, right? Digestion, breaking down the food. Absorbing means getting it to all of our cells and our parts of the body that need it, right? So food allergy involves an interaction between a dietary protein and the immune system, right? So this is why we're going to see in a minute, some of these are really, really concerning. So when we have proteins from milk, eggs, nuts, peanut allergies, shellfish allergies, these can really cause severe reactions in the body. People may need to have EpiPens or different things to help the body manage that, but food allergies can be very concerning. All right, amino acid, here we see again, think of how we're continuing to break down and use our protein. So think of it as recycling, right? How we recycle, which is good to do. Right? When we recycle, our protein kind of does the same thing, where we get to continually use it, except for when we need those essential amino acids. We need to get that from the diet. Our body can't keep recycling that. Right, protein synthesis, I'm not going to go through the transcription and translation with you. This is where a lot of that chemistry comes into play here. But again, for those of you who are really interested in furthering your health career in the field of dietary nutrition or things of that nature, these are really fascinating chapters on how the body works. Right? Again, we get our energy, protein functions. So protein provides structure. And when we say provide structure, we're going to mean that in our body, we need lots of different things. For instance, we all need to have some structure for our hair, right? Our cells need to have structure so that they don't go mishmash and go out of shape, so that they kind of stay round, right? And so we'll see that our protein is really important. A big part of protein really helps us with what we call antibodies. Antibodies help us to fight off disease, right? And they're really important. So this is where protein is essential to us. As I said, it provides structure. And so we can read through here and see the many different parts and areas of our body where protein comes into play. Protein deficiency, again, sad sights here, but these are really examples that we see when either there's really almost minimal or no protein in the diet at all, or there's not sufficient protein in the diet. Wherever we see children that are extremely thin, but they have distended bellies, or we see children that maybe their head seems to be out of proportion to their body and they're extremely thin, right? Again, these are countries that are typically war-torn, or they are going through famine. They don't have access to animal protein or even plant-based proteins, right? Protein excess, right? So when we eat animal protein specifically, in excess, this is when we are going to have an issue with increased risk of heart disease and weight gain, right? So again, remember we said we don't want a lot of that saturated fat because that clogs up our arteries, right? And so that's what we're saying here, is we want to just make sure to keep our protein intake at our average numbers. You can read here about how nitrogen, remember we said that protein is one of the 3 macronutrients that contains nitrogen, and kind of see how that helps us to function. So how much protein do we need? what we say is that for adults, we need about 0.8 grams of protein for every kilogram that we weigh. Now, a kilogram is like half of a pound, really. So what we see here is if we had somebody who weighed 70 kilograms, that's about 140 pounds. And if we calculate 0.8 times 70, we're going to see that somebody who weighs 140 should have about 56 grams of protein. So most of us should be in the 10 to 35% range. In other words, we're getting 10 to 35% of our kcals from protein. There are times in our life that we need more protein, right? When we're pregnant. Again, we're forming another body structure within us, and that requires more. Babies need more protein, right? And then even as we continue down the life spectrum and span here, and we get to late adulthood, those like myself who are over 50, we actually want to try to increase our protein intake because we should be doing what we call weight-bearing exercise or strength training. Because as we get older, we're going to lose muscle mass, and our protein is what's going to help us to kind of maintain that muscle mass. Do we need protein supplements? No, not usually. So my youngest daughter likes to drink chocolate protein shakes. I'm not always wild about that because, again, we can get sufficient amounts of protein in our diet. And if you look here, you'll see that some of these shakes contain a whole lot of calories. And if we have enough in our diet, there might not be a need for that. Here, looking at making good choices, right? So learning how to eat better types of protein than those that we might want to eat less of. Vegans or vegetarian diets, what are they? Let's understand that a little bit. So again, someone who says they're semi-vegetarian, what they really mean is that, sometimes they want to be a vegetarian and sometimes they don't. So maybe they skip meat sometimes, but they're not fully committed. A pescatarian is someone who really doesn't eat meats, but they eat fish and they eat the dairy products, right? A lacto-ovo vegetarian is someone who doesn't eat red meat. They don't eat fish. They do, however, eat chicken. They do eat eggs and milk, things that are produced by animals. Your lacto-vegetarian does not eat red meat. They don't eat fish and they don't eat eggs, but they do eat dairy. They do eat meat, milk and cheese. And then really it's only a vegan. A vegan is someone who eats nothing from animal sources. So that means that they would not drink milk or have eggs because those come from animals, right? So really a vegan vegetarian is the only pattern of food intake that eliminates all animal products. And then here you can see there's a couple questions here. Why is the shape of the protein important? So we said that it really determines the protein's function, what it does. Why must some amino acids be consumed in the diet? Because we said what did we say? Our body can't make it. And so when it's an essential amino acid, it's really, really important, right? Food allergies, we said, why are they triggered? By incompletely digested proteins. That's how they come about. What is true about the function of the proteins in the body? Well, we said that they help to transport foods through our body. That's what's really helpful, that proteins do. They kind of cross those lines. Remember, we said once we digest food, we need to absorb it and get it to the cells, and they're really good at carrying stuff, right? What is true about the protein in the modern American diet? Well, we said that right? Most of it, 2/3 of it comes from meat products. Okay, guys, so that's it. That's all we're going to talk about for protein. We will see you next time.